You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Mission Log Prodigy, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. Episode 18, Mindwalk.
Welcome back into another episode of Mission Log Prodigy, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. I'm Norman Lau.
And I'm Ashley Victoria Robinson. Just like our flagship Mission Log podcast, each and every week here on Mission Log Prodigy, we discuss each and every episode of this animated series to discover what makes each of them so special and see if there are any morals, meanings, or messages that we've learned.
This week, episode 18, Mindwalk. Now, please remember that Mission Log Prodigy is an in-depth review podcast. So if you've not seen Mindwalk, please put us on pause and then walk your mind back over to us to hear us talk about it, because you can't mind walk into what we're thinking. You got to listen to us talk about what we're thinking, I think, right?
I'm going to say yes. Maybe we've switched bodies. Who knows? But what I do know is that Mission Log Prodigy is produced for YouTube and as a regular podcast. So please be sure to engage that like and share button and subscribe to us here on the Roddenberry Entertainment YouTube channel. And please make sure to listen to podcasts.roddenberry.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you can find all of these amazing Roddenberry podcasts. You can also follow Mission Log Prodigy on Twitter at ML_Prodigy. It's one of my favorite places on Twitter to keep up with all of our latest news and updates from the show and the show within the show.
Ooh, the show within the show within the show. This is like Inception, but more Trekkie. So before we jump into the recap, here's why our podcast is so unique. We want to hear from you, younger cadets. We love the older officers, but we love our younger cadets more. Sorry, not sorry. I really do love you, younger cadets. And send us your voicemail message, a 1 to 2 minute voicemail message at missionlog-prodigy.com. Share your thoughts on the show. Remember, that's mission log dash. That's the little dash between the two words, not the word dash. Mission log dash prodigy at roddenberry.com. And in your message, please answer these questions. What is your first name and age? Did you like the episode? What was your favorite part? And most importantly, what did you learn?
It's a big question. It's the most important question. It's the one that we always want to know the most about, because we look forward to hearing your comments, which will be featured, of course, at the end of the show, my favorite part of the show. And just to start stuff off, here are our answers to those exact same questions. Norm, putting you on the spot. I don't know if you're emotionally prepared for this. Did you like the episode?
All right. So caps lock, bold, I, period, love, period, this, period, episode, period. I did in my notes, type this out in bold caps. That's how much I love the episode. So how about you?
I also really enjoyed this episode. That's kind of all I want to say about it, because I know sometimes we get like real excited at the top, but there's so much to talk about. Question number 2, big question. What was your favorite part?
Okay, so people that listen to the standard Mission Log podcast, they've probably heard me ad nauseum profess my love for season 2 of Voyager's Threshold, because it's literally like so far my favorite episode of Star Trek Voyager. So when Janeway said that she was once a salamander and referenced Threshold, I air punched the ceiling to death. I was so happy. It was just ridiculous. I can't describe it. It's indescribable, that kind of joy. That I just love that scene. It just made me so happy. How about you, Ashley?
Very similar to you. I loved all of the Voyager references. There have been some sprinkled throughout the season. But I think that this episode, if you have watched that original series, it really, really comes home. But I think my favorite like singular moment was Dal as Janeway talking to the diviner. Just like the meta, the like references on references, layers on layers of that was just so cool to see. Okay. What did we learn?
Okay, so one of my favorite scenes is where I think I learned the message of this episode, or at least the message that I came away with, when Dal Janeway confronted hologram Janeway in that hidden section underneath the bridge. And I basically learned from their dialogue from Dal Janeway that you can't just hide from your problems. If there is a mess that was made, like Janeway's father said in her story, you have to make something great out of a mess you've made and not have somebody clean up your mess for you. In this case, it would be the children, and that's not fair to them. So you have to own up to whatever mess is in front of you that you made, because no one else made that mess but you. Right?
Well said.
Yeah. But that's what I got out of it. What did you get out of it?
I got, again, like I'm stuck on the Voyager thing. I got a lot of confirmation bias in this episode, mainly that Janeway is still a scientist. Like that is something that we are introduced to really early in Voyager. And then as the show progresses, her sort of area of expertise or focus shifts according to what the narrative of that series needs. And watching her be in her element and ultimately use science to be able to like mind swaps be all over Star Trek. Like the science wins the day. Her acceptance of Rock is like, you're going to be a great science officer. So like that, just all of that harkening back to like OG season 1 Janeway really just like touched my soul, and I loved it so much.
Yeah, this is a very Voyager-y episode, if I can say Voyager-y. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks, Ashley. Those were great. We're going to get into some other greater points later on, but now it's time for the recap for Star Trek Prodigy episode 18, Mindwalk, written by Julie Benson and Shauna Benson and directed by Sung Shin. The Valnukat living construct used hologram Janeway without her knowledge to program the protostar to fly out of the neutral zone and directly into the path of the Dauntless. Knowing that she can no longer trust herself, hologram Janeway ends her own program, even though Dal and the rest of the crew are still locked out of the bridge controls and watch helplessly as the Dauntless closes in. They are hailing the protostar, but Dal and his crew know they can't reply for fear of activating the living construct's program to destroy any Starfleet technology. To make matters worse, under the influence of a living construct, the protostar flees the scene. On the Dauntless, Commander Tyces can only watch in frustration, while Dr. Noom arrives and tells him that Admiral isn't answering her comm badge. Unbeknownst to either of them, she was knocked unconscious by the Diviner, who, despite Dreadnought's desire to dispose of her out of an airlock, believes an Admiral's absence from the ship would draw unwanted attention to their plans. Asensio reverts back to her disguise and to place Janeway's comm badge in the Vice Admiral's quarters and order for Janeway not to be disturbed. Tyces orders the Dauntless to pursue the protostar as Asensio returns to the bridge and advises Tyces to merge their warp bubble with the protostars and prevent its escape while its proto-engine is still offline. On the protostar, Zero is fascinated by monitoring what is happening, just as Jankum jinxes them by saying at least the Dauntless isn't shooting at them, which it immediately does. Gwyn reminds Dal that once their shields are down, they can be boarded. Running out of options, including Rock's teching the tech with an inverse tachyon pulse to try to communicate with the ship, which Jankum shoots down because he can't tech that much tech, Gwyn believes that Zero's telepathy is their best shot at contacting the Admiral, and Zero believes that Dal's genetic gifts can boost Zero's range. In a rushed telepathic link, Dal and Zero try and reach Admiral Janeway, currently unconscious and stuffed in a closet, while the Dauntless continues to fire phasers at them, violently jolting the protostar and knocking Dal unconscious to the floor. As he comes to, Dal feels a little strange. Maybe it is because he is actually Vice Admiral Janeway, who now looks and sounds just like Dal. Zero telepathically confirms that Vice Admiral Janeway's mind is in Dal's body, as the rest of the crew are stunned. Rock believes that there's a scientific explanation for all of this, to which Zero explains that perhaps a neural transference happened while trying to reach Janeway. Gwyn shudders in horror, realizing that if Janeway is in Dal's body, then Dal is in the Vice Admiral's body, who wakes up on the Dauntless and is not quite as together as Janeway was when she woke up in the protostar. Disoriented and a little bit clumsy in this new body, Dal Janeway stumbles out of the Admiral's quarters, turns into a corridor in the nick of time as the Diviner appears to put the Vice Admiral in shackles. After being spotted by another officer, Dal Janeway is beamed directly to the bridge, and even though he looks like Janeway, Dal's Dal-like behavior causes immediate concern amongst Janeway's crew. Even Dr. Noom hands Dal Janeway a coffee, which he spits out, again causing her officers to take notice. Back on the protostar, Vice Admiral Janeway Dal has been briefed about the living construct, its threat to Starfleet, and why Dal and his crew have been evading the Dauntless this entire time. In typical Janeway fashion, it's time to science their way to a solution. However, after trying and failing to reverse the neural transfer process, Zero and Dal Janeway agree that they need to find and fast because back on the Dauntless, Dal is barely keeping up appearances as concern regarding the Vice Admiral's behavior grows. After shoving Dr. Noom onto the bridge, Dal Janeway, or Janeway Dal, orders antennas, Tyces that is, to take charge for the time being. Essentia takes advantage of the chaos and suggests to Tyces that there may be a significant weapon aboard the Protostar, currently headed into Federation space. Tyces responds that he will notify Starfleet Command to request that they send all ships in that sector to intercept the Protostar. After studying the Protostar schematics and controls, Dal Janeway accesses the hidden deck below the bridge where Hologram Janeway is hiding. And after introducing himself as Vice Admiral Janeway, Hologram Janeway demands proof, to which Dal Janeway answers with a story about spilled paints and their father saying, "Come on, Kate, make something great out of that mess." And they do so, together. Vice Admiral Janeway uses her command codes to bypass the Protostar's lockouts and rebuilds Hologram Janeway, which not only purges the living construct's control from her, but also accesses her fragmented memories, including those of what happened to Captain Chakotay. And before they could explore those memories further, Rock summons Dal Janeway to the bridge because they figured out how to reverse the process. Dal's latent ancient Organian DNA can transfer consciousness through a physical link. Remember, when Dal and Zero first made telepathic contact with Janeway, the Dauntless's phasers hit the Protostar at the same time, creating an energy link between the ships. And this link is what they have to recreate. All Dal Janeway has to do is leave the ship, fly across the warp bubble, and make contact with her own body. Dal Janeway said she was once turned into a salamander, so by comparison, how hard could this be? Suddenly, Murph spots Janeway Dal high above in the Dauntless, and through the use of what Dal Janeway calls charades, the Protostar crew acts out their plans, which on the Dauntless, Janeway Dal also acts out in understanding his crew's plans, but is just seen as more concerning behavior, which causes Janeway Dal to be taken into custody. As Dal Janeway suits up and prepares to leave the Protostar to walk into the warp bubble, she tells Gwyn some heartbreaking news. As an augment, Dal would never be accepted into Starfleet because of the laws outlawing any genetically manipulated beings as a result of the eugenics wars. In the Dauntless's sickbay, the diviner stands at the bed of Janeway Dal, who is in restraints after being sedated by Dr. Noom while trying to avoid capture by her own officers. Dal Janeway is shocked when the diviner releases her, repaying Janeway for her kindness all this time. He confesses that he still must fulfill his mission to destroy Starfleet, but requests that if he should fail, the diviner asks if Janeway would protect Gwyn, to which Dal acknowledges just how special Gwyn is to the both of them. And with that, Dal Janeway slips past a few officers, suits up, walks the length of the Dauntless, and launches herself towards the Protostar, only to be observed on the main viewing screen the entire time by her crew, who believes she's placed the Dauntless and her crew in danger. Time for Dal Janeway to do the same, using Murph as a tether, but as soon as they are close enough to touch, Janeway Dal is pulled away by the Dauntless's tractor beam. Thinking fast and knowing she needs to create a link to complete the neural transfer, Dal Janeway fires a phaser at Janeway Dal, recreating the original conditions of the first swap, and successfully reverses the process. With their minds intact and back in their correct bodies, Dal is reeled back to the Protostar by Murph, who gets a huge hug. But when Dal returns to the bridge, once again, they are out of the frying pan and into a new fire, as the Protostar drops out of warp and into a Starfleet Armada welcoming party, complete with the Dauntless bringing up the rear. No problem, because the Vice Admiral is back in her own body and now on their side, right? Well, it turns out that when the Vice Admiral suffered under Dal's erratic behavior, it caused her staff to be concerned. In other words, Janeway's in the brig and is in no position to help anyone. The end.
Ooh.
Big deep breath, because that was a lot to get across.
Remember when we texted and said, what if we made the recap shorter? And then this episode happens.
That was my shorter.
I have to use twice as many words in specific orders to describe what each and every character is. The fact that that was even halfway, like my tinfoil hat is off to you, my friend.
Gosh. It was not easy, but that's why this episode is it's so dense and so wonderful and so complex and hard to kind of pull apart because of all of those reasons. And I did, I kind of fumbled a little bit with Janeway Dal Janeway. But I just did an episode of Voyager. It was Deadlock, where there was Janeway 1 and Janeway 2, and I had to keep going back between Janeway 1 and Janeway 2, or Harry 1 and Harry 2.
Yes. Oh my God.
So I just need the next one I review. I just need an easy one. Give me a softball, please. Well, you know what? Let's jump right into it.
Shall we?
A lot to talk about.
Okay, so Murph is indestructible, right? We've just all accepted this.
Yeah, I think so. Mm-hmm.
I remember you and I in a high state of panic the first time Murph went into the vacuum of space, and now like little baby boy Murph is just out in space, stretching as much as possible. I can't wait to see what situation comes up in future where Murph's amorphous abilities are like not going to be able to save the day in some meaningful way.
Right. There was what was it in the previous episode? He was in a ball.
Yes.
You know, and you were like, okay, so is this new form? Does he need to be protected? Does he need to be coddled, as a toddler? Nope. He is security officer Murph, big time. Right. So that, yeah, it will be interesting to see. It's kind of like Superman. Like, when is this kryptonite
something
moment?
will happen.
Yeah, something will happen, and we're all going to cry rivers of tears when that
absolutely
happens.
100%. What do you got?
This is one of those kind of episodes where, obviously there's a Freaky Friday for all of you, those of you who aren't familiar with that. Google Freaky Friday and they'll come up with a bunch of different movies. I think the most recent was the Jamie Lee Curtis, Lindsay Lohan version of that movie.
Yes.
But it's a body swap. It's where, you have those, oh my gosh, I'm in so-and-so's body and I'm in theirs. And now you have Brett Gray and Kate Mulgrew kind of aping each other's performances. And they were wonderful. I mean, I really got a kick. Like, I was laughing aloud many times, especially I think with Kate trying to interpret Brett as Dal. I think she had more to work with as Vice Admiral Janeway's, her performance, like both vocally and in the animation. What do you think?
I definitely agree. She's also a much more seasoned actor. So I would honestly expect her to be doing the superior performance. Dal is also much more of a broad strokes cartoon character than Janeway. Janeway's quite reserved and plays everything quite close to the vest. Even hologram Janeway, who's like a little softer and fuzzier than the Janeway that we're used to. So that's part of it as well. But all you need to do a good impression is really like a couple physical mannerisms and a couple spoken man. You don't even have to do like a good impression. And neither of them is doing an impression of the other person in terms of the vocal quality.
Right.
So I think the animators are always, of course, incredible on the show, but they're doing a ton of heavy lifting because they are doing the quote unquote acting, the physical acting, the presentational. And they do a good job at giving them just enough. And when they choose to overstep those bounds, it is for comedy, right? Like Janeway feet up playing with the toy Voyager, which I was obsessed with.
I know.
But they both Brett and Kate did it. Like, they're my friends who come over for dinner. Both of the actors found the rhythms of the way those characters speak, their inflections, their ups, their downs, their pauses. And that really carried it. It was so impressive because impersonations are like, they're easy in theory, and I think they're very hard in practice.
Right. I think that's perfectly said. Speaking of something that I believe was also perfectly said in this episode, I know I practiced that transition for the last 30
was
seconds.
Really well done.
So earlier on, the diviner says, when Dreadnought says, I wish we could have thrown her out of an airlock, the diviner says, an admiral's absence would certainly bring unwanted attention. The crew of the Protostar were known as the Unwanted.
Oh.
So if you threw the admiral out, it would bring the attention of the Unwanted, which it did in a way in this episode. So there's a nice little play on words there with us being reminded, we at the audience being reminded that the kids are still known as the Unwanted, which was also brought up in Preludes with the bounty on the kids. They were also known as the Unwanted. So I thought that it was a nice bit of repetition there.
Definitely not unintentional.
I don't think anything in this series is done unintentionally. I know.
And that even extends to like Essentia. Like, she is so devious in this episode. I know that's not her name, but that's what I'm going to be continuing to call her.
You can call her Jamala. So
Nah, because I will, one, forget that, and two, confuse myself.
All right, Asensio is good.
She is going to have a big bad James Bond villain turn at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And we're on episode 18, so I imagine it's coming up on us pretty quickly of 20 episodes of this first season. And watching her in this episode was just like such a masterclass in villainy, because there's two types of Star Trek villains. There's the really subtle ones, and then there's like the really evil, over the top ones. And I'm excited to watch her make that transition. But throughout this episode, I was like, this is the episode where they're going to find her out. And then they never did.
And when you really, really, really think about it, without the credits, a 20, quote unquote, 23-ish minute episode turns into like a 21-minute episode.
Yeah.
So if that holds true, there's only 42 minutes of storytelling left to finish out this season. 42 minutes.
Wow. Like one less than one episode, live action episode of Star Trek.
Mm-hmm. To wrap up. And I think it's fair to say that it's not all going to be wrapped up. It really depends on just how much they're willing to answer. They willing, being the, the powers that be, the Hagemans and, Aaron Waltke and like all the writers and that giant writer's room of geniuses and all that stuff. So maybe we'll get the answers, maybe we won't. But some of the things that I love about Prodigy, and I know we both love the quality of the production, but how good was that merging of the warp bubbles animation?
So stunning. I mean, Prodigy is so purple and so pretty at all times. But that in particular was just Gorgina, as like with red as let's go into color theory, the opposing color to the purple of like the slipstream animation that's in gold. So beautiful. Not enough great things to say about how the show freaking looks.
I know. There's that. There's like, I love the L-cars that Zero is watching. So
please, I saw your notes about the L-cars. So like, let's do L-car corner.
Okay. So in the L-cars, like the L-cars that I love, there was the size difference that you saw between like the Protostar and the Dauntless when the Dauntless was merging warp bubbles. So that was on Zero's screen. And then when Dal Janeway finally escapes her quarters, she turns around a corner really quickly, but then you see like one of those panel L cars of like the Dauntless, like in the full cross section in like all purples and yellows and stuff. And I was just staring at that. I'm like, wow, that's got to be a wallpaper somewhere for somebody. So please send all of us all the wallpapers, because they're amazing. I can't get enough of that look. And I'm glad that it's still kind of like this visual vocabulary from like the Voyager era, that area of 24th century to like now, Did you find any of those like specifically that you fell in love with?
I just really love everything on the Protostar. So I'm like, and as you mentioned, because it's tinier, like I'm a very small person. So I was like, yes, this is what I would want. I could like, that would be a ship that I could actually manage myself on. A ship where there's like Klingons walking around, I'm toast and I need someone to reach everything on the high shelves.
Now, here's something, we just mentioned that there are no mistakes, there are no lost moments in these 21-minute-esque episodes. Something that I found really interesting. So I timestamped this at 14 minutes and 6 seconds when hologram Janeway was showing, Dal Janeway, like some of those fragmented memories. And then you can see on hologram Janeway, they close in on her hands and wrists. And then when she's talking about what happened on Solum, hologram Janeway kind of tenses one of her hands around her wrists, like she's actually feeling something really significant. And I'm wondering why they dropped that particular zoom in. They zoomed in. It wasn't just there's no throwaway in animation, right? There's no mistake. That's specifically done for a specific reason. And I'm really curious to see if that goes anywhere.
It's interesting because I hadn't noted that. And then I saw your note about that. And then layering that on top of the sort of augment discussion that we've been having since that reveal, like it's making me wonder if maybe Janeway has had some procedure enhancement, if there's sort of something underlying there that's also going to make her run as a more parallel story and character to Dal, because she does also name check the eugenics war, which a huge reference for anybody who is familiar with previous Star Trek canon. And I hadn't even considered that the mutants, augments, kind of everything, that every kind of creature that would fall into that category is like outlawed in this continuity. And like, what does that mean for Dal? I hadn't even thought about that. And I was like, oh, wow. Well, there's the drama of season 2 right there.
Yeah, they've been like kind of like dropping that hint in like the last couple of episodes. So there's I'm gonna like end at least my observations here with like one last thing. So there is the story of Moses and the Exodus, and Moses like sacrificed everything to get his people, the people out of Egypt and into the promised land. But he wasn't allowed in. Like he himself wasn't allowed in. So I feel like there's this really interesting, almost kind of like catharsis that's going to happen when we ever get to see like the resolution of Dal's story, where what does that happen? Like how does that affect him? Like what has he learned this entire time of being a leader? And is this part of being a leader? So, but we're going to get into a little bit more of that in our discussion right now. So yeah, right now. So let's, something I mentioned earlier, Ashley, that I thought was interesting when Janeway and Janeway were talking, when Dal Janeway and Hologram Janeway were talking. You can't hide from your mistakes, right? Come on, Kate, make something great out of that mess. Maybe there's something that even a hologram, as well programmed as hologram Janeway is, maybe there's something that is more authentic about responses and reactions in a real person than a hologram could ever be programmed to do, right? Maybe a real person just has that something unique or special that can't be replicated no matter how advanced your code or algorithms. So maybe this is why holograms don't actually run starships. Maybe you just need that kind of, to quote Space 1999's computer, human decision required, because you have those decisions based on emotion, based on snap judgment, based on experience that maybe a hologram Janeway never had to encounter until this very moment. Any thoughts on that?
I think that is a fascinating observation. Again, a deeply held Star Trek discussion, particularly when it comes to Voyager. How human are the holograms? Like, what does it mean? How complete are they? It's so funny. I'm like so on James Bond on the brain right now. To quote Skyfall, like sometimes you need a human to pull the trigger.
Yeah.
And I think that this is going to be, to me, there's an inevitable merging of some type, even if it's like purely spiritual or representational, of these two Janeways coming down the line for us. And I think that is what this is heralding. And it makes me like both, I want to see it. Again, like, are we getting a Tuvix situation, or is this going to be like a little more devastating along the lines of like a Data death?
More devastating than Tuvix. Okay, we're ramping that up.
Yeah, I mean, but like, there's all this precedent for this type of storytelling that we're building towards with the character who was the face of this front. Like, it's just so fascinating to me.
It's kind of like in the last couple episodes, we, especially starting with Preludes, because I felt that Preludes was kind of like the kickoff of kind of like the beginning of the end, right? So you have Admiral Janeway being knocked out in Preludes, so you remove that Janeway from the chessboard. Now, at the end of Ghost in the Machine, you have hologram Janeway being corrupted. And in this episode, early on, she takes herself off the chessboard. But when the two of them actually meet in a way, right, they both feel that, no, we have to be back on the chessboard, regardless of the mistakes that we've made, or regardless of the situation that we're in. It's kind of like, even though they weren't, neither of them, Dal Janeway or hologram Janeway, are the real Janeway, both of them together are the best possible Janeway that's at that moment. And I love that, right? And do what you can with what you're given. What do you have for an observation for the discussion?
Man, you have to watch your back. This is episode 18, and the Dauntless crew, who we have seen at the height of their powers, super capable, super elite, led by this incredible leader who is like an admiral but still serving on the bridge. They have no idea what is happening with Essentia and Essentia cum the Diviner under their very noses. And I was wondering, because New Trek, this sort of like post Kelvinverse movies era of Star Trek, is very like interested in the idea of Starfleet and what Starfleet seems to represent as like an org. And it seems to me that they're so focused on the Starfleet driven missions and doing things by the book as they're supposed to per their orders that they can't see the forest for the trees, and they can't see these imminent threats growing up around them. And I think there were a couple moments in this episode which like really clearly illustrated how dangerous the diviner is about to become again. Even as he sort of lets Janeway go, it's a very threatening scene. Now, part of that's John Noble. John Noble, kind of a scary dude, either scary or like a complete Walter teddy bear. And I just keep waiting for. I mean, I'm mostly here for antennas, for Dices to like coolly turn around and be like, I've noticed for a long time that things are. He's kind of the Spock character, right? So I'm waiting for him to unpack that observation. But I need these folks to wake up.
I have a weird theory about Tyses. I think I mentioned it in the previous episode, but as much as I'm like the way that I was watching, we were watching like the clues about Essentia turning. We didn't know what Essentia was going to turn into, but then we finally got the reveal. I feel the same way about Tyses.
Interesting.
Now, not necessarily like he's another of the order that has hidden himself in the past or whatever, but I don't think that Tyses is strictly the Andorian that we think he is. There is one scene where he, and it was in Preludes, where he said, "Until then, we must bide our time." Andorians don't bide their time.
Certainly not.
That's kind of like not their culture. They're a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more abrupt. They're kind of like the cooler version of that emotion compared to like the Tellarites. Tellarites are all kind of like id, right? That's all on the surface, but the Andorians are, I guess it would be, I don't know, would be ego, not super ego.
I guess, because I don't think they're super ego. I think humans are more that.
Right. So
but ego in the strictest sense, right? Not ego in like the pop culture sense.
Right.
That's some homework for people to do if you're not familiar.
I'm waiting for Tyses to like have his moment, but as of right now, he's just super cool and super interesting to watch.
I also don't think you just cast Daveed Diggs and have him just be observational dude.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
What else you got?
Well, I'm glad that you brought up the diviner and kind of like the diviner's motives, because as we said before, there's no mistakes that are made, in this. There are no throwaways. There are no just because. So I've always wanted to know why the diviner, because the diviner earlier on this season, great name. Tyson says a serious name for a serious individual in Preludes. I'm like, okay, that got me thinking. But then when Essentia revealed herself to be the Vindicator, I'm like, okay, now we have people choosing these really, really cool names. So what does the diviner mean? And I looked it up online. I want to give you kind of like all of you out there, the Merriam-Webster online definition of what the diviner is. A diviner is a person who practices divination or a soothsayer. So what is divination and what is a soothsayer? Divination is the art or practice that seeks to foresee or foretell future events or discover hidden knowledge, usually by the interpretation of omens or by the aid of supernatural powers. And a soothsayer is a person who predicts the future by magical, intuitive, or more rational means. So, doing all this this adding and subtracting, does the diviner protect Gwyn so purposefully because he's already divined her future? Technology and time travel, like if you kind of quote Arthur C. Clarke's third rule of technology, or third rule of that he says that technology is just a different way of not being able to interpret magic. So
I don't disagree.
Yeah. So
it's kind of that annoying Marvel Cinematic Universe of like, magic is just science we don't understand yet. And like, yes, but also like it's fun to just be magic sometimes.
Yeah. So it's hard to say, like, why choose this name specifically for him? And since he was catapulted 20 years into the past, what does he know that is informing his decisions right now? And has he already divined this information?
And it's so funny because that like directly ties into like one of my observations is in this episode is specifically like that not Gwen, that's a Spider-Man character. Gwen really matters. And you're like, yes, duh, of course I know this. But I just want to bring this up because of that scene that I mentioned at the top where the diviner is speaking to Dal Janeway over as she's laying down in the bed. And being like, please, no matter what happens, protect my daughter. And then like Dal Janeway is like, yes, I would do anything for Gwen. Because we kind of in the first half of the season, there was like maybe they're going to be like romantically like involved. Maybe they're going to hold hands sometimes. Like we weren't really sure. And we've kind of stepped away from that. And they're much more like siblings now. But now we're bringing that relationship and Gwen as a character and as a person's value like back to the forefront. So if we have to wrap up at least this portion of the diviner storyline, I think that makes sense. And I think we're prepping for a reprise of the one-on-one battle between father-daughter that we saw in episode 10.
Yeah, and that's a great way of like looking at and projecting like what we know, you know, of what we've seen, because there's that pause. Like what I think that Ghost in the Machine was more important episode than I think people are giving it credit for, because it's that pause where you really kind of take a look at what do these individual vignettes in the holodeck mean, and hers with her father putting her kind of like taking her off guard, like, you know, unsteadying her feet and this trusting him again, you know, and him saying like, hey, I'm a great listener. You know, he's a bartender, bartenders listen. Yes. And her being able to like speak her truth to him, and then him as the father figure that I think she's always wanted, saying that, you know, whatever you do, make sure that that decision is your decision and not anyone else's. So I think that speaks volumes of maybe where Gwen is heading. And if she has a final confrontation with the diviner in this season, what will that confrontation look like based on what she's learned, what she's accepted, and then what she has been able to distill down into who is he and why do I need him in my life? All right. Is he still important to me in that sense? You know, can he be saved?
Yeah. Right? Which is also going to be interesting because in shows that tend to be made for like an all ages wider audience, like quote unquote good guys tend to be good and quote unquote bad guys tend to be bad. And it's going to be interesting to see, because this is Star Trek and because we are consistently surprised by Prodigy, like how true that's going to become, because Janeway gets a lot of success in this episode by trusting her instincts, right? To go back to like, she's a scientist. She like sciences her way out of it. I almost said a swear because I was thinking of The Martian. Everybody who's seen The Martian knows what I'm talking about. Yep. And Gwen and Dal are characters who are learning, like, yes, trust your instincts, but to use more of their like logic brain. And I wonder if we're going to see Janeway, maybe because Dal was in there having those experiences for a bit, have the danger sense that I've been like begging everyone to have aboard and figure out like what a Sensia, she's so great, is up to. Because I feel like the lesson that Janeway learned this episode is kind of the lesson that her whole crew aboard the Dauntless needs to learn this episode. Yeah,
there's I think that right now all of the storylines are finally starting to converge. And I do like that the Janeway's crew on the Dauntless, they weren't just going along with Janeway's, you know, abstract behavior, for lack of a better term. You know, they really did kind of, you know, observe her as, okay, this is not normal. And then this is putting the ship in danger, not normal. And okay, we have to either figure out what happened to you, or, you know, you're going to, you know, put this entire operation like in danger. And sometimes when you're watching it, like in a Freaky Friday movie, we as the audience are kind of like banging on the screen, like saying, how can you not notice these things? Right? You know, how are these, like the thing with the coffee, which I thought was hilarious. And you know what? I'm going to butcher Dr. Nom's name for eternity and a day, because I just don't remember.
We're saying Noom because the small plate is the key.
What does that mean?
So there's a commercial here, sidebar,
All right.
app corner. There's a commercial for the app Noom, which is about like learning portion control. And they're always like, the small plate is the key.
Oh, I got you now. Maybe that's why I keep saying Noom, because I too was a customer there. Not a sponsor, but it'd be great if they were.
Hey, anytime they want to come check us out, they're welcome.
So we have just a few minutes here, and I want to get to our wrap up because there are a few kind of like last ideas that that will lead us like into, I think, where our thoughts are going for the final 2 episodes. So what do you have left for us here, Ashley?
Okay, as usual, like there is layers on layers on layers. This is a Star Trek onion that I am so happy to get to come and play in. That's not how that works. Don't play in onions. What I really learned was what it was like to watch a story told in the style of Star Trek Voyager through the specifics and the lens of Star Trek Prodigy. And as someone who is a fan of both those things, it was such a delight. If you've been watching and listening to the show for a long time, you know that I love pointing out like the classic tropes, the classic Easter eggs. I love seeing these young characters play these themes for a new generation of audience members. And that is exactly what this episode does from moment to moment to moment, while simultaneously continuing the like overarching narrative that we're driving toward, because this is the penultimate episode. It confirms for me that great Star Trek stories and characters can transcend the specifics of a certain franchise, and they can resonate anywhere. And that is what is kind of fun about what Star Trek is right now, because it can be referential because of how long the franchise has been around. Yeah. And so now I'm going to be sitting at the edge of my seat in episodes 19 and 20 being like, okay, how is the Janeway-esque, the Janeway-Chakotay pairing, how are we bringing that to Gwyn and Dal to make sure that everybody survives into season 2? Because I think that is the inevitable broad strokes of what we're going to be getting. So yeah. Give me your final thoughts. I know we only have a couple minutes. We got to let everybody else talk.
Well, I don't really have a lot to add. So, we try and infuse, these shows, being part of the Mission Log family of podcasts with those morals and meanings and messages. But there is so much exposition in this episode that it really didn't leave a lot for these, and for all of you Mission Log fans who are playing the home game, the quote unquote, here's the lesson you need to learn, bonk, bonk on the head. You see, Timmy, moments that sometimes, rise to the surface very quickly. What I love what they're doing here is that you and I and everyone who's watching, these episodes of Prodigy, like they're allowing us to kind of like watch these episodes and unravel, like you said, peel back the layers of the onion in multiple viewings. And I think that's so where, fun. Right? And that's where so the secret of this entire series is. Because some people are like, well, I didn't really connect with it on the surface. I'm like, okay, that's fine on the surface. But what happens when you get beneath the surface, right? And what happens when you actually start seeing the serialization and the secrets tying in from episode 18 back to episode 4 or 3 or 1, right? So again, there are no mistakes in this series right now. They may seem like they're not connected in a way, but all these details are eventually going to, well, at least that's my hope. And I've learned to trust this team that's putting this series together. That's my hope, that everything is going to pay off or add additional layers into season 2. So that's where I think where we are. We only have 2 episodes left. Again, 41 actual storytelling minutes, and let's see what this team can do. Right?
I mean, they can do anything, man. Yeah. They have never, ever, ever led us astray. Okay. Norm and I can go on and on, but we have actually reached the end of our show. So thank you everybody for joining us here on a Mission Log Prodigy. If you enjoyed the show, and I mean, why wouldn't you? Please make sure that you like and share and subscribe and smash all of those buttons, and that you join the Mission Log Prodigy playlist on Roddenberry Entertainment's YouTube channel right here where you're watching us right now, or find us on your podcast catcher of choice. Just download all the podcatchers and subscribe to us on all of the podcatchers. That would be amazing.
It's the best thing to do.
Absolutely. Right? And Mission Log Prodigy is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment, production and technical direction by the venerable Earl Green. Our website and your opportunity to comment and connect with us is missionlogpodcast.com. And if you would like to support Mission Log directly, and again, why wouldn't you? You can do so at patreon.com/missionlog.
Buckle up, folks, because this is happening. And we just wanted to thank you, all of you, for taking the time to be with us. And we look forward to sharing our thoughts with you on episode 19 next week. But take a deep breath, relax. Because right now, we're going to leave you with these very special incoming transmissions.
Receiving listener communications. Message playback begins.
Name and age, cadet.
My name is Rook and my age is 7.
All right, Rook. First of all, did you like the episode?
Yes.
What was your favorite part of the
My
episode?
favorite part was when Morph switched really long.
What did you learn from the episode?
I don't never trust Zero about telepathic things.
Yeah, last episode it was trust Zero to solve the mystery, but this time it's a little different.
Yeah.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.